We continue now at the top of Daf Mem Zayin and Beis in Meseches Sotah. This is Sotah Daf 47b. The Mishnah continues ad Yomov until his days. This is until the time of Yochanan Kohen Gadol. Hayapatish Makab Yerushalayim. The hammers would strike in Yerushalayim. Uvi Yomov, and in his days, Ein Sarich Lishol al Admai. There was no need to ask about Demai. And Rashi explains that Yomov Hayapatish Makab Yerushalayim, until his days, the hammer would strike in Yerushalayim. Bebeis Hanafachim B'chol Shel Moed. We're talking about the hammers in the house of the blacksmiths on Chol Moed. Lasos Meleches Davar Ha'avet Shemutaris B'Moed, meaning they did this kind of work on Chol Moed if it involved the loss of money. Meaning if it's the kind of work where if they would not have done it, it would have involved the loss of money. That kind of work is generally permitted, and so they were doing this kind of work until on Chol Moed until his time. V'Yamadhu, and he got up. V'Gazral Hanafachim Afilu B'Davar Ha'avet. He made a gezerah on the blacksmiths, even if it was the kind of work where if the work would not be done, it would involve a loss of money. Still, he said this kind of work should not be done in Chol Moed. B'Mnei Shekola Nishma L'Meirachak, because you can hear the sound from far away. People don't realize, people don't know that it's being done for a situation where there would be involved the loss of money, and so therefore they're not going to understand the halacha. And that's what we explain in Moed Katan. That's why he stopped this kind of work that involved a lot of noise, that involved the hitting of the hammers. In all of his days, a person did not need to ask his friend regarding Demai. He didn't need to ask if the Meister was taken off or not. Shehu Iskin, because Yochanan Kohen Gadol made a takana, Sheyu Kol Halochin Me'am Haaretz Masrin, that anybody who buys from an Am Haaretz, they should take off Meiser. And the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Minayin Shim Nerfo Egla. How do we know that if the neck of the calf was broken, V'achar Kach Nimtza Horeg, and then after that they find the murderer Shein Poteres, so that does not exempt him, that he still is punished. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says, V'la'aretz lo yichupar ladam asher shupach bo kim bedam shofcha, that the only way there's an atonement is if we punish the individual who spilled the blood, and so the individual is going to be punished even in a situation where the neck of the calf was already broken. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Eid Echad Omer Ra'isi Asahoreg V'chulu. So it said if one witness says, I saw the murderer, and another witness says he didn't see the murderer, so that's considered a suffix, and they still do the procedure of Egla Arufa. And the Gemara says, Time of the Machishle. The only reason over here it's considered a suffix is because there's another witness that's contradicting. Hello Machishle, Eid Echad Mehem. It sounds like if there'd be no contradiction, that first one aid would be believed, and we would not do the procedure of Egla Arufa. We would believe the witness that he saw, that he could identify, or that he saw the murderer. And the Gemara says, Minohani Mili, from where do we know that this is the case, that one aid is believed? The Tanu Rabbanan, because the rabbis taught, Lo Noda Mihiko, it's not known who the murderer was. Hanoda Mihiko, but if it's known, if somebody knew who did it, Afilu Echad B'Sofa Olam, even if it's just one witness at the end of the world, Lo Hayu Orphan, so they do not do the procedure of Egla Arufa. Rabbi Akiva says, Minayin l'Sanhedrin sharo echad sheharag hasanefesh. How do we know that, let's say the Sanhedrin sees somebody kill someone, they ain't makir no, so but they don't recognize the individual, so they did see it, but they can't recognize, they can't identify. Shelo hayu orphan. So how do we know that we don't do the process of Egla Arufa in that situation? Talmud Lomar ve'einenu lo ro. It says in the pasuk that our eyes did not see, v'halo ro, and in this case their eyes did see, and therefore there would be no Egla Arufa. And the Gemara says, Hashta de'amr eid echad mehem. And now that we're saying that one witness is believed, so idachad hechi motzi machishle. So the next part of the Mishnah, or the line in the Mishnah, which says that if one aid comes and contradicts, so then we say that it's a suffix. How is it possible for that second aid to contradict the first aid? The Amar Ula, but didn't Ula say, Kol makom shemina Torah eid echad, anytime the Torah believes one witness, harei kan shnayim, we really count that witness as if you have two witnesses. V'yein devarav shel echad b'makom shnayim, and the word of one witness, and the words of one witness are not able to stand up against the word of two witnesses. In other words, if you have a situation over here where we believe that first aid, and we say that he did see the murderer, and therefore there is no procedure of Egla Arufa, so if another aid comes in and says that the first aid did not see anything, we should not believe the second aid, because the first aid already has the status of two aid. And so the Gemara says, Amar lach Ula will respond to you, Tani, rather you're right, you should teach in the Mishnah, Lo hayu orphan. Even in a situation of one against one, they do not do the procedure of Egla Arufa, because we do in fact believe the first aid over the second aid. V'chein Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, and Rabbi Yitzchak says, likewise, Tani lo hayu orphan, it should be taught in the Mishnah again that they do not do the procedure of Egla Arufa in this case. It is not considered a situation of suffix. Rabbi Chia says, Tani hayu arfin. No, the Mishnah should say exactly like we read it. It should say that they do the procedure of egel arufa. It's considered a genuine suffix when you have one against one. And so the Gemara says, Rabbi Chia kasha de Ula, but according to Rabbi Chia, isn't it difficult what Ula said? And the Gemara says, Lo kasha, it's not difficult. Kan b'basachas, in one case we're talking where they come in at the same time. When it's one against one and they come at the same time, so then they cancel each other out, that's considered a suffix. Then they do the procedure of egel arufa. But kan b'zachar zeh. But in the other case, it's when they come zachar zeh. If the first witness comes in and his testimony is accepted, so then that is considered like two witnesses. And then if another witness comes in, he will not be able to contradict that first witness. And the Gemara continues to nan. We learned in our Mishnah, let's say one witness says, I saw the murderer, and two witnesses say, you did not see the murderer. So in such a situation, hayu orphan, they do the procedure of egel arufa because it's considered to be a suffix. And we can draw an inference from that case. Hachad v'chad, let's say it would be one witness against one witness. So lo hayu orphan, in that case it would not be considered to be a suffix. They would not do the procedure of egel arufa because we would say that first witness that we are believing is considered to be like two witnesses. And the Gemara says to Yufta de Rabbi Chia, that's a refutation of Rabbi Chia's opinion. Because Rabbi Chia said again, Tani hayu orphan, that the way you should learn in our Mishnah is that it is considered a suffix by one against one, and we do the procedure of egla arufa. And the Gemara says, V'lataymech, but according to your reasoning, Amos Seifa, let's look at the end of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah, we can draw an inference in the opposite direction. Shnayim omrim ra'inu v'eid echad omer lo re'isem, let's say two witnesses say that we saw the murderer, and one witness says that you did not see the murderer, lo hayu orphan. So in that situation, they do not do the procedure of egla arufa because the two witnesses are believed. We consider it not to be a suffix. Hachad v'chad, let's say it's one against one, we can infer hayu orphan that we would do the procedure of egla arufa, that it would be considered a suffix, and it would follow what Rav Chia said. And so the Gemara says, Ella, rather, our Mishnah, the end of our Mishnah, has nothing to do with drawing the inferences. The purpose of those last two cases is not to draw inferences. Rather, the Mishnah at the end over there, it's talking about situations of people who are coming in who are psulei edus. They're actually disqualified from testimony. And we're following what Reb Nechemia said. Diamar, because Reb Nechemia says, anytime the Torah believes one witness, halach achar rov deos, you follow the majority of the opinions. And let's say you have a situation of two women against one man, that's going to be the same thing as kishnei anashim b'ishacha, that's going to be the same thing as two men against one man. Meaning to say, according to this approach in the Gemara, the idea is that when the Mishnah is saying eid echad, one witness says, I saw the murderer, and two witnesses say, you did not see the murderer, those two witnesses are actually women at the end of the Mishnah, and it's teaching you this exact chiddush that we follow the majority. So if you have a situation of one witness saying I saw and two witnesses saying that you did not see, so in that case we follow the majority and we say there is a genuine suffix. And then the other way around, let's say you have two witnesses and they say that we saw, and then one witness says you did not see. Again, the idea is we follow the majority in these kind of situations where you have psulei edus. The Gemara offers a slightly different version. V'ika diamri, there are those who say kol hechad da'asa eid echad kasher meikar, that actually if the first witness that came was actually an eid echad kasher, let's say the first witness comes and says that I saw the murder, and it happens to be somebody who would be a kasher witness in court, it would be a man. So then afilu mei anashim ki echad damyan. So then against that eid echad kasher, even if 100 women would come in, that would actually just be like one witness. In that case, we would not follow the majority. But however, the end of the Mishnah is talking about where it's all psulei edus. And here at the end of our Mishnah, what are we talking about? What we're talking about is a situation where a woman came in first. She was the first one witness, and in that situation, again, you would follow majority. That's the chiddush of the end of our Mishnah. And according to this, we understand the statement of Rabbi Nechemia as follows. Rabbi Nechemia says, anytime the Torah believes one witness, halach achar rov deos, you should follow the majority of the opinions. And if you have a situation of two women against one man, so that's treated the same as two men against one man, meaning in that case where they're all disqualified witnesses, we follow the majority. But then we would add, it would not apply in the following case, aval, but shtei nashim b'ishachar, let's say you have a situation of two women versus one man, ki palga upalga dami, then in that situation, that would already be considered like 50-50, meaning it would be considered like two witnesses against two witnesses. It would be a situation which would revert to being considered to be a suffix. And the Gemara now says at the end, v'tarte psulei edus lamali. Now what's the reason why we have to add at the end of the Mishnah if it's all teaching us the same thing, that we follow the majority of witnesses when you have a situation of disqualified witnesses? Why do we have to teach that twice? witness. And the Gemara says, Mahu detema, because what might you have said? Ki hazlin on basar ovdeos. When do we say we follow the majority of the witnesses? That's l'chumra. That's only in a situation where it results in a stringency. Avalakula, but let's say you have a situation where it's going to result in a leniency. So then maybe then we would not say that. We wouldn't follow the majority of witnesses where it results in a leniency of not doing the procedure of egla arufa. And so kamash malon, so it comes to teach us that even in a situation of leniency, we are going to follow the majority of the witnesses. And Rashi over here notes, V'ha amar Ula, but Ula said, now this entire sugya was earlier, so Rashi says, sugya zu kula perashtia beperak mishakini, this entire sugya I explained in detail earlier. This is on Lamed Aleph Amid Beis, Ve'ina chaluka kan klum. There's no difference between the sugya over here and the sugya over there, so you can see over there for Rashi's full explanation. And the Gemara continues that the two dots, the Mishnah said, Misha Rabu Harotzchin V'chulu, when there became an abundance of murderers, so then there's no more procedure of Egla Arufa. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Misha Rabu Harotzchanin, from when there was an abundance of murderers, Batla Egla Arufa, so then Egla Arufa is nullified, Lefisha Eina Bo El Ala Safek, because the whole purpose of Egla Arufa is in a situation of a doubt of who the murderer was. Misha Rabu Harotzchanin Begoli, but when you have an abundance of murderers in public, people know who the murderers in general are, so Batla Egla Arufa. So then the procedure of Egla Arufa, it is nullified. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Misharabu Hanuaf and V'chulu. So then it said, when there was an abundance of adultery, the Mishnah went on to say that there's no more bitter waters. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, V'niko ha'ish me'avon. It says that the man, he's going to be innocent from any sin. Let's say the waters test his wife and it turns out she's guilty. So the husband is going to be innocent from that punishment that happens to the wife. And the Gemara darshans Bizman sho'ish menuka me'avon, in a situation where the husband, if he's clean from sin, so then hamayim bod kinasishto, so then the waters will test his wife. But eino ish menuka me'avon, but if the husband is not clean from sin, ein hamayim bod kinasishto, then the waters do not test his wife. And the Brisa continues, V'yomer, and the pasuk says, Lo efkod al benosechem ki says nana v'chulu, I'm not going to punish your daughters because of this nus, again, because the husbands also are committing the same avera. And the Gemara continues, my V'yomer, why does the Brisa bring the second pasuk? And the Gemara explains, V'chitema, because if you're going to say, Avon didei in divnei udebin say lo, maybe you'll say his sin, meaning if the husband is sinning, so yes, so then the waters, they don't test his wife. But let's say his sons or his daughters, they're involved in znus, so maybe that does not prevent the waters from testing his wife. And so that's tashma, so come in here, that's the second pasuk, Lo efkod al benosechem ki says nana v'al kalosechem ki sno afna, I'm not going to punish your daughters and your daughter-in-laws for the znus, meaning to say, even if you have a situation where the person's children are committing acts of znus, that also can prevent the waters from testing his wife. And the Gemara continues, V'chitema avon eshes ish in avon depnuya lo. Maybe you'll say it only applies if the husband commits a sin of adultery with a married woman, but if it's with an unmarried woman, maybe that's not going to prevent the waters from testing his wife. Tashma, so the pasuk goes on to say, Ki heim im hazonos yifaredu vim hakadeshos yizabechu v'gomer. Again, they're together with the zonos, regardless of whether these zonos are married or not married. And the Gemara continues, Mai v'yam lo yavin yilavet. What does it mean when the pasuk goes on to say that the nation without understanding is distraught? Amar Rabbi Elazar says, Amar Lahem Navi Yisrael, the prophet says to Yisrael, Imatem makpiden al atzmechem, if you're strict with yourselves, if you're careful not to do averis, so mayim bodkin neshosechem, so then the waters will test your wives, vim lav, but if not, ein hamayim bodkin neshosechem, then the waters will not test your wives, and that's what you will be distraught about, because if you have this kind of suspicion, you won't be able to investigate that suspicion. And the Gemara continues, Misharabu Bale Hana, when there was an increase in the world of people who were seeking pleasure, Nisavsu Hadinin V'niskalkalu Hamaisim, the judgments and the deeds, they became corrupted. Ve'ein Noach Ba'olam, and there was no comfort in the world. Misharabu Roe Panim Bedin, when there was an increase of favoritism in judgment, Batul Lo Saguru, so then it was nullified the idea of not being intimidated by other people, Upasak Lo Sakiru, and it ceased the idea of not showing favoritism in judgment, Uparku Al Shamayim, and they released from themselves the yoke of heaven, V'nasnu Aleim, and they placed upon themselves Ol Basar V'dam, the yoke of flesh and blood. And the Gemara continues, Misharabu lochshe lechishas bedin, when there was more whisperings in the court. Again, these are whisperings that are going behind the backs of the litigants, as Rashi over here says, lochshe lechishas orche hadayonim, the lawyers, umislachshim im hadayonim, they whisper to the judges, liftoach lem pesach bezechuso shel zeh uvechovaso shel zeh, to try to find this one to make him innocent, and this one to make that one guilty. So when that happened, the Rabba Charonaf B'Yisrael, there was more anger in Klal Yisrael, when Estalka Hashchina, and the Shechina was removed, Mishum Shenamar, as it says in the pasuk, V'kerev Elokim Yishbot, in the midst of God there is judgment. The idea is that God is only there when there is justice. And the Gemara continues, Misharabu achrei bitzam libam holech, when there was an increase of people following materialism, Rabu ha'omrim l'ratov v'latov ra, there was also an increase in people calling things that are evil good and things that are good evil. Misharabu ha'omrim l'ratov v'latov ra, when there was an increase of people referring to evil things as good and good things as evil, Rabu hoi hoi ba'olam, there was more hoi hoi in the world, meaning there was more anguish, there was more crying out in the world. Misharabu moshche harok, when there was an increase in people who draw out their spittle, that is a reference to arrogance. Rabu hayehirim, so there was more arrogant people. V'nismatu hatalmidim, and that made that there was a diminishing of students. V'atorah chozeres alamden, the Torah had to seek out those who would be able to learn it. Misharabu hayehirim, when there was an increase in arrogance, hischilu benos Yisrael lehinase lehirim, so the daughters of Israel, they began to marry these arrogant people. She'ein doreinu roa ela lepanim, because our generation, it only looks at the face, it only looks at what's on the surface, and not what is beneath. And the Gemara says, Ini, is that really true? V'amar mar, but didn't the master say, Haiman de meyar afilo inshe beisi lo makabel, that if a person is arrogant, even to the people in his own household, he's not accepted. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Gever yor v'lo yinva, it says, if you have an arrogant person, as the Gemara darshans, lo yinva afilo b'nav shalo, he's not going to be accepted even into his own household. And so the Gemara says, Meikar originally kafza alei, that the women, they would actually pursue these arrogant men, l'sof mitzal alayu, but it just means that in the end, then their husbands would be demeaned in their eyes. And the Gemara continues, Misharabu matile milei al balei batim, when there was an increase of the balei batim, that they had to support the judges with their merchandise. So Rabba Hashochat, so that's when there was an increase of bribery, Vatayas HaMishpat, and there was an increase of corrupt judgment, Upaska Tova, and goodness ceased. Misharabu mekablone tovasecha mechazkani tovasecha, and when there was an increase of people who they accepted, I'll accept your favors, and the favors that you do me, I'll take them into account. So Rabu isha yasher be'ein of yasa, so then there was an increase of people doing whatever they wanted because the judges were accepting bribes. Shefolim hugbu, the low ones, they were raised up, v'hagavoim hushpalu, and those who were up, they were taken down. Umalchusa azla v'navla, and the kingship, the monarchy, it continued to deteriorate. Misharabut Sari Ayin v'Torfei Teref, when there was an increase of people who are misers, and people again, Torfei Teref, they're pursuing their own hana, they're pursuing their own greed. Rabu Ma'amsei Halev v'Kovsei Adai Milahalvo, so then there was an increase of people who closed their hearts, and people who held back from lending money. V'Avra Mashakasa b'Torah, and they violated what the Torah says. Hishamar l'chapen v'gomer, the pasuk talks about helping out those who are poor. Misharabu netuyas garnu misakros einayim, when there was an increase, this is referring to women who tried to entice men. Rabu mayim hamorim, so then there was an increase in the bitter waters, meaning there was an increase in husbands who suspected their wives and wanted to use the bitter waters. Ela shapasku, but as we said before, the bitter waters stopped working. And the Gemara continues, Misharabu mekapli matanos, when there was an increase of people who accepted gifts, nismatu hayomim niskatzru hashanim, so the days and the years became fewer, it caused shortened lives. T'chsiv, as it's written, v'sonim matanos yichya, the person who hates gifts, he will be able to live. And the Gemara continues, Misharabu zuchuche halev, when the arrogant people increased, these are people that didn't feel they needed to listen to their Rebbe. Rabu machlokas bi Yisrael, so then there was an increase of arguments in Klal Yisrael. Misharabu talmidei Shammai v'Hillel shelo shimshu kol tzorchan, when there was an increase of students of Shammai and Hillel who didn't serve properly their Rebbeim, that they didn't listen properly to their Rebbeim. Rabu machlokas bi Yisrael, there was again an increase of arguments in Klal Yisrael. V'nasis Torah kishtei Torahs, and the Torah became like two Torahs. Misharabu mekablei tzedakah min ovdei kochavim, when there was an increase of people who took charity from the idol worshippers. Hayu Yisrael lemala v'hem lamata, so Klal Yisrael, they were raised up, and the non-Jews, they were put down. Now this is actually a euphemism, Rashi says. It really means the opposite. Klal Yisrael, they were put down. Yisrael lifnim, Yisrael was in front. Again, this is a euphemism. V'hem lacher, and they were behind. Again, it really means to say that Klal Yisrael was put behind. And the Gemara continues at the two dots, Mishameis Yosi ben Yoezer v'chulu, when Yosi ben Yoezer died, Maya Shkolos, what does it mean, the clusters? Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, Ish Sha'akol Bo, the Ashkolos is a person who has everything, he has all of the qualities. And Rashi explains, Sha'akol Bo, everything is within him, Torah ba'amita, meaning to say the true Torah, Vein Dofi v'shichu machlokas, there's nothing that's false, there's nothing that's forgotten, there's no arguments, that was all with Yosi ben Yoezer. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Yochanan Kohen Gadol Havir Hodoyas HaMaiser V'chulu. Yochanan Kohen Gadol, he abolished the idea of confessing that the Maiser was given properly. My time, and what's the reason? Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says, Lefi she'ein nos to nos so kitikuna, because they actually didn't give it properly. The Rachmana Amar Diyahavi LeLeviim, because the Torah says that the Maiser should be given to the Leviim, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Memches Amud Aleph.